Okay, so we're chatting today, Nutanix. You fairly recently published a report or sponsored a report on the impact of data center models on energy efficiency and carbon footprint. So the starting point would be sort of what was the thinking? Why did you want to get involved in that kind of exercise?
So thanks, Philip. So we actually started work on this report more than a year ago. And so before all the energy crisis sort of blew up and so on. And so the reason is because my background is I'm a chartered accountant, and I have lots of former colleagues who work in the investment community. And so what I could see was there's like a big, massive change happening in the business world, being led by the investment community with this sort of growth in ESG. And so ESG is all about making companies more sustainable, i.e. running across a broader set of metrics than just profit and loss. So thinking about the wider context of the business and business risks. And one of those is energy. And then the second risk is climate. And so we could see that these were really going to be really, really important topics to our customers. And so we wanted to get ahead of the curve. And it also had to be not research coming from Nutanix, but we wanted to find an independent body. So we used Atlantic Ventures to go out to the market, provide research, and we thought this would be really useful information to our customers. And it turns out, well, we've now got all this ESG regulation. We've had the energy crisis. It was actually quite a really quite good thing to do.
Yeah, so I guess your customers are thinking you had some kind of sort of premonition of what was going on, so you can predict the future. But no, in terms of what the report sort of in more detail came up with, I think there was a series of sort of ideas or suggestions as to positive contributions, certain things that can make positive contributions to the, as you say, the energy efficiency stroke carbon footprint scenario. And perhaps you could say a little bit about each of those, and one of the main ones I think was automation. So can you give us some sort of idea as to where that fits in?
Yeah, okay. So again, like this was actually one of the problems. So Nutanix has been in business since 2009. And one of the things that we were set up to solve was this sort of manual effort that was required in running IT, and we wanted to eliminate that and just create simple inbuilt automation. So IT that basically runs itself. Now that was the vision, and so one of the things that it was addressing was making organizations more efficient. So things like right-sizing consumption of resources, so for running an app. And so typically what happens is in the old world is you might set everything up on day one, and then it all would work pretty well, be pretty efficient on day one. But as soon as but actually businesses don't happen at one moment in time, they're happening continuously over time. So you have to continuously work at trying to make your IT operations, including the resource consumption part, run as efficiently as possible. And so having people do this all the time, you're just, with human error, you're going to make mistakes. It's just going to become over time, it's not going to work as well. So the idea behind that is automation. We take away the heavy lifting, and you just come in and check on it every couple of months to make sure it's working, tweak it, and it should work better and become more efficient. That was the sort of thinking behind automation. We did not design this specifically to address energy consumption. It was inbuilt from right in the DNA of the company, and we just wanted to basically make IT more efficient. That was really the goal, and it just turns out that actually more efficient means from an energy point of view as well.
Yeah, and one of the other areas, I mean, automation's been around for quite a while, as you say, the basis of your company, but something that's a little more, well, I suppose it is and isn't new. People will tell you that liquid cooling's been around since, I don't know, 60s or 70s, but in this current sort of iteration, it's fairly new. So again, I think the report highlighted that what innovative or next generation cooling technologies, which I guess includes liquid cooling, is another area that can make a positive contribution when it comes to the sort of energy and carbon footprint situation.
So when you look into like if you want to reduce your carbon emissions, so you've got the energy at the rack, and then you've got the data center piece. So you've got so how can I make my IT run more efficiently? And that's the bit that Nutanix is really focused on. And then it's the second part is about the cooling piece, keeping it cool. And so traditionally, the IT industry uses air cooling. And it turns out that's actually pretty inefficient. And there's a couple of really bad things happen when you air cool. Firstly, obviously, it uses a whole ton of energy. And so typically, it's measured by PUE. And so if I'm using 5 kilowatts for my rack, I probably need almost the same again to cool it based on my data center. So not only does it use a lot of energy, it uses a whole ton of water. And what did we have in 2022? We had our worst drought in Europe in 500 years. And I uncovered that there was a story about one of the major data center companies. I'm not going to say who, you can do some research, but they reached the national news in the Netherlands because it turned out that one of their data centers was using something like, I think it was 84 million liters of water in 1 year, which is like a town. It's a town's worth of water. It's absolutely terrifying amounts of water. So we know that air cooling is really bad. So and liquid cooling was viewed as interesting, but just in high performance environments. But actually, that technology seems to have come a long way. We've been talking to a lot of different liquid cooling vendors out there, and it turns out so I've either seen there's a couple of approaches. One is you dip your servers into a tank, or you actually have the water, and they use treated water running through the servers themselves. But they lend themselves really well to x86, which is the HCI form factor that we use in Nutanix, and it massively lowers the cooling by I talked about the doubling effect. Well, in fact, you can almost eliminate that. So it's marginal, the extra energy you need for cooling, and also you don't need the water. So although liquid cooling sounds like it uses lots of water, it doesn't. So we think this technology was pretty expensive, but actually the price has come down a lot. And given the huge value it's bringing in, as energy costs have gone up and water consumption is not really something, so we need to keep water consumption down low. Suddenly the business case makes sense. Well, that was quite a long-winded answer, but it's big, and this is over the next 5 years. I expect this to become an industry. It's going to be adopted across industry, and the big data center companies like Equinix, they're all over it.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask. I mean, and is it possible? Will companies sort of deploy it as they build out new facilities or retrofit existing ones, or will there be a big rip and replace? I mean, how easy is it to replace your air cooling in an existing data center with a liquid cooling solution?
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be one more thing. So if you can imagine a set of scales, that's going to tip the balance towards customers saying, I do not want to be in the data center business. I want to give this problem to somebody else to deal with. So it's going to be, it will need some ripping and replacing. And I think that's what, organizations like Equinix are having to get their heads around. How can they bring it in? And part of it's going to be down to the companies who are providing liquid cooling. How can they make this technology easy to adopt? What we have to think about in Nutanix is, so we do some of the support. And so thinking about, well, if you get a disk failure and your server is liquid cooled, how does that impact your maintenance piece? So there's going to be lots of things to think about, but I think if you're an end user, you want to give that problem to somebody else. So we expect the liquid cooling to sit with the big colo providers and the hyperscalers, and maybe organizations a bit like Nutanix to partner with these liquid cooling companies. So
I just thought, I mean, clearly the servers do the lion's share of the processing and therefore generate large amounts of heat, but I'm just wondering, will in time, storage hardware and network, do they generate sufficient heat that they will need to be liquid cooled in some way, shape, or form, so the same issues apply? Or is that not nearly the same scale of problem as the heat generated by servers?
So I'm an accountant. You're asking me questions slightly out of my comfort zone, so I might leave those ones to the experts. But But what you did highlight is, so with HCI, the storage is in the x86 box. So that problem is taken care of. And that we see as being the advantage for HCI, in that there's less of a form factor to cool. So, but I'll leave the more detailed answer to the experts.
No, that's fine. It's just something that occurred to me now. Actually, it's not something I'd thought about before.
I mean, that's why I see straight away. I saw that as being an advantage for HCI in this.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And another area on the energy efficiency side is, I mean, again, renewables. There's been a lot of talk about it, and well, again, the cynics say, well, how do you actually? Everyone says they got renewable energy, but you don't. It doesn't come in green from wherever it is. So how do you actually prove it? But clearly, there are moves to a lot of data centers want to get renewable energy, and there are also things like these power purchase agreements. So if, again, in a nutshell, you can encapsulate what's going on, as say renewables, we all know about them, but how can the data center make a sort of meaningful difference and demonstrate it is using renewables, and what do things like power purchase agreements bring to the party as well?
Okay, so with renewables, you expect, well, if my data center is using renewables, I want to have that surely is going to give me a massive benefit. But the accounting rules are that for your carbon emissions calculation, unless you can absolutely 100% prove that the renewables you're generating are going into that specific server rack, then you cannot use the renewables grid in your carbon emissions calculation. So I would expect that what that means is, for the bulk of customers out there, if you're using renewables, you won't get the benefit of that in your calculation. So you'll be having to report higher carbon emissions. So what this whole area, and then as I sort of gone into it in more detail, I understood what's involved in a power purchase agreement. And then we've seen the complexity and the volatility of the energy markets in the last year. And that is just going to get worse. So the sort of conclusion to me, again, is this is another driver behind getting out of the data center business if I'm an end user, and giving this whole problem to colo providers and hyperscalers, and those organizations are going to need to become energy companies partly. So because this is such a big, complex area, so these PPA agreements, they require a lot, significant capital investment, specialized financing, and if I'm a law firm running my own data center, why do I want to get involved with becoming an energy company? I want to get that problem to someone else. So what we're trying to do in these types of reports is just highlight these are the things that are going to be really important, so that customers can make informed decisions. Does that make sense, Phil?
Yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, that's obviously it's a trend that was happening anyway, but I can see how these sort of considerations would push more people, as you say, to outsource data center activities.
Yeah.
And also the report talks about transforming 3-tier architecture. So it'd be good to understand sort of what that traditional model is, and sort of what the suggestion is as to what should replace that.
Okay, so it's probably worth just giving a little bit of a history lesson, but it's quite an interesting story, and I don't know whether you heard this, but this is the sort of Nutanix origin story. So we came about from, it was the Google versus Yahoo search engine war, and back in around, I think that was about 1999, 2000, and so the Google team managed to get access to the Yahoo data center, and Yahoo was using traditional 3-tier. They were using NetApp filers to run their search engines. But what they realized was that they had like a little cluster for each part of the world, and so you'd have these like tiny little clusters switching, flickering on as different parts of the world were using the internet, but 90% of the infrastructure wasn't being used. And what they did was they worked out, well, if we carry on using 3-tier architecture to run our business in Google, then we're pretty quickly going to, it's going to become astronomically expensive. And also it's going to become expensive, it's the people management required, because you need storage admins to manage all these storage clusters. and they recognized actually the inefficiencies of the architecture, and they came up with a new architecture which had the compute and storage in an x86 server. It was a scale out model, and then you use software intelligence to manage the underlying hardware. And they called this the Google File System, and they spent 4 years developing it, and they published it in 2007. And the outcome of this was that they managed to get their cost base down by, I think it was 9 times lower than Yahoo's, because of the efficiency of the architecture. And if they'd carried on with 3-tier, there wouldn't have been enough storage admins in the world to run their platform. It was a scale. So where Nutanix came from was actually the two of our 3 co-founders built that Google File System. And they said, well, this architecture, they could see it was the superior advantages of it. And they said, we can bring this approach to the enterprise. And so that's how, so they founded Nutanix. So we're built on this, what we call HCI, or hyperconverged infrastructure, which is basically compute and storage in an x86 server, and then with software to do the automation and make and simplify it. So the typical tasks in managing IT are automated, and it's up to, I think we've measured our automation as around 70% compared to the 3-tier way of running IT. So it's a substantially simpler environment to manage. And then from an energy consumption perspective, it's all designed that you buy just what you need, one box, and you scale out one box at a time. So it's just like a just-in-time way of running your IT. So you never need to over provision. Whereas with the 3-tier approach is because things like disk storage arrays, they're quite hard to migrate from one storage array to another. So organizations typically massively over provision. So they'll buy a much bigger storage array than they need so they can grow into it, because it's so painful when it gets full and you've got to migrate to the next one. So it's quite a long-winded answer, but HCI is a transformative new infrastructure. It's been around now for sort of 10 years. Market share is now, I think, up there with storage. So the traditional 3-tier. What we would say is we've actually now gone through that. I don't know if you heard about the Gartner hype cycle. So you've seen that before, but we've actually gone up, down, and we're now going on that sort of peak of maturity. Now we're continuing to grow at around 30% of the market. There are other HCI providers than Nutanix, so the report we did was not just Nutanix, but it's about HCI in general. So VMware have an HCI offering as well. So there is, and it's a more mature. It is now a relatively mature offering in the market.
And in terms of hype, I mean, I think in answering some of the other questions, you've hinted at it, but in terms of what hype of a converged infrastructure offers when it comes to energy, helping to reduce energy consumption, shrink carbon footprint, what would you say are the most obvious, the main benefits?
Okay, so the first thing, when I was logically looking at it, because you're sizing it differently, you size based on what is it I need on the floor today to service my business, and then knowing that what the software will do is it'll predict when you're going to run out of headroom, and then so you can have that technology, the next node delivered, and normally we can have an extra node delivered within 30 days from placing an order. So it's a different way of running your IT where you're just buying just what you need. And what we've done is when we've done that comparison and we actually got Atlantic Ventures to do this. So they actually went through an exercise, and I think they came up with a figure about 30% in this example is that it's a smaller form factor which will drive lower energy consumption. That's really as simple as that. It's a much simpler environment, and it won't be the lowest in every case, because you might have a use case which is high compute or very high storage focused, in which case HCI might not be the right choice, or it's a very, very small workload. So something that might suit, very small, single node. but we'd say for like 85% of use cases, we think it will be lower in terms of energy consumption because of this. It's the underlying efficiency of the architecture.
And in terms of the, I mean, you said, you know, the hype cycle, you've been sort of, you know, started low, got high, and now it's sort of matured. But I'm just interested in hyperconverge because, yeah, I mean, yeah, I used to see it come across, you know, my emails and all that a few years ago, and now I won't say it's gone away, but it, you know, as you say, the hype's gone, the reality's here. So long-winded way of saying, what is the still is the potential? You know, how mature in terms of use is hyperconverged? We still got quite a long way to go outside of the hyperscalers, who I guess, like a lot of technology, are the early adopters, or are many people already realizing that the benefits of hyperconverged?
So there's still a lot of legacy, what we call legacy 3-tier architecture out there. So lots of customers are still using more traditional IT. And that's because, you know, well, it's because some people are comfortable with what they know. And so, and there's been I think generally IT, they're less risk averse, you know, it's this sort of risk aversion piece for that. That's maybe why some organizations have not moved. They've also, it depends on how you look at the TCO. So if you have a very, very narrow view and you're just looking at invoice cost, then you might say, well, 3-tier might be a bit cheaper. It might be 10 or 20% cheaper than HCI. But actually, it's probably because they've not done their homework to do the full business case over time. They've not factored in energy consumption into the model. And as energy costs have risen, you need to do that. You've not looked at the automation and the impact of that on the business. So that's why some organizations may not have moved across. Then the other big change is what's happening in the market is there's this big push to cloud. And so this is part of our future, is what we've designed as this software approach. And it's this, and all the intelligence is in the software, and it's all about optimizing that consumption piece. And what we're seeing is as more organizations want to go to cloud, and by cloud that could mean public cloud, or it could be in a private cloud but managed by somebody else. So we're seeing this sort of what we call this multi-cloud world, and this is the sort of future. This is the future of Nutanix, is managing that multi-cloud world. So we're taking our software, and you can now run. So instead of just running workloads in your private cloud, you can run them in public cloud. And we made an announcement for Christmas, so you can now run Azure on Nutanix. And then what we found, we need to get some more data points around this. Is we've proven out on a cost point of view, is that same approach, the same software that optimizes resources on premise does the same in public cloud. So we're squeezing down the consumption of resources, and so that brings down the cost, and it should also bring down the carbon emissions as well. So the future for us and for our HCI platform is that extension into public cloud. So you can give the customer a choice. They can run any workload either in a private cloud or a public cloud, and have one simple platform to do that management, to optimize cost and optimize consumption of IT resources and keep including your carbon.
Okay, just on that, I'm just intrigued. Do you know whether you get many customers knock on the door? Is it always because they want operational efficiencies and cost savings, or increasingly are some of them saying you need to help us with our ESR as well, or is that still, I'd say traditionally it was always a sort of nice to have add-on? And as you say, if you got IT efficiency, you almost inevitably get some kind of environmental benefit. Or are you getting more companies putting that, you know, nearer the front of their shopping list, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so it's this has been a big change in the market. So particularly at the moment in the UK, it's public sector and banking, the financial services sector, where the financial services has got specific regulation requirements coming around, where you're going to have to potentially report your emissions on each financial transaction. So they're I'd say are more keenly looking at this. And then in the public sector, so for example, like the NHS are bringing net zero into their procurement rules, and I'm seeing it with local governments as well. So it's becoming up to like 30% of the scorecard of procurements. So So this is becoming really, really important. So, organizations are understanding, and we've heard this from Gartner, that every investment needs to be a 2-for-1. So it needs to be both delivering value in terms of cost and give sustainability outcomes. So what we're trying to ensure is that we're ticking both those boxes.
Yeah, and I guess the good news seems to be the report says that regardless of the size of the organization, the technologies we've discussed, and obviously hyperconvergence in particular, everyone can benefit from them. But I think if I've understood what you said during the conversation, more and more companies may well come to the conclusion that although they might reap the benefits themselves, the easier and long-term, more sensible route might be to move to a third-party provider, whether it's a colo or a cloud managed services. Is that the sort of landscape you're looking at, anything?
Yeah. So the strategy is, we all say it's a journey. So going from one to the other is so what we're seeing is, so lots of customers who've made the leap maybe directly from an on-prem into lifting and shifting into public cloud. They're finding that can be a bit of a shock from a price point of view, because they've not made their environments ready to get all the benefits from cloud. So that, and so by going straight in, they're seeing their costs skyrocket. Whereas we see other customers use an approach of going 3-tier architecture to HCI Nutanix, so becoming like as a step to make them more cloud-like, but in a more controlled way. And then once you're on HCI and you've right-sized your IT operations, then moving across into public cloud. And we've now got this clear route with our software. You can just migrate really easily across. And it's, so we sort of see that step. So by doing the Nutanix HCI as the interim step, you can move your infrastructure into colo. And to give you an idea about how that's easy is because typically we're seeing, let's say customers might have, you've got 10 racks, you might need 2 with on a Nutanix HCI because of our efficient form factor, and putting 2 racks into colo is a lot easier than trying to put 10 in. And so that's an example of how it simplifies it. And then moving your 2-rack environment to colo, extending that out to public cloud or a bare metal service, that then is not such a big leap. So that this is the sort of evolution that we see, a sensible evolution that we recommend customers going through.
Okay, and although I think in that answer you've covered perhaps my final question, but maybe not entirely, in terms of any recommendations for organizations looking at this or beginning that journey, are there any things they need to be aware of to do sort of upfront so that they get the best out of it and they don't get sort of, as you say, go from one straight to the far extreme and suddenly, I say, cloud has always been sold as a cost saving, maybe, and that doesn't always work. Just any sort of advice you'd give to people as they're looking to get more efficiency in the data center and as we're talking sustainability as well.
So just to introduce, I'm not sure I introduced myself fully, but at the beginning, but my role, I'm a senior cloud economist at Nutanix. And so what we do is we do business cases. And so this is what customers need to do. It's a baseline. So understand what is it you've got. So and then what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve? So what is to give you an example, one of our customers is a big accountancy firm, one of the biggest. So I had an interview with them last week, and what we did with them was we did that business case. We understood their landscape, we understood what outcomes they were looking for. And then what we did was we then did what was called a TCO analysis, which is looking at the full cost base of what they're running today. And then we looked at alternative platform choices and what those choices would bring from both a cost perspective and then a business value perspective. And then we did that assessment against traditional IT, a competitive HCI platform, and then we looked at public cloud. And then we also looked at running it in their own data center and then running it in colo as well. So we did that sort of full cost analysis. What we tried to do was translate all the business benefits into financial value. And it came pretty clear to them that actually doing that interim step was the right process. So they've gone to Nutanix HCI in colocation. So that made sense for them. And it will depend for each customer based on your specific workloads, what's the right answer. If you've got a very simple environment and you're a small customer, moving to public cloud might be easy. It just really depends. But doing that analysis is really important. So if you're interested in Nutanix, and we've got a team who will help you do the numbers, and we're all accountants. So we just work the numbers, and you make the decision. It may well be it's not, Nutanix might not make sense for you, but we'll do the numbers and hopefully help you come to the right decision.
And that in the process of that assessment, you say you do the numbers, but also if customers want to give sort of more than normal weighting, if you like, to ESR type objectives, you can sort of punch those in as well.
We can do all the calculations. Yeah. So what is each so what does each option deliver in terms of ESG benefits? And this is in terms of, we look at the three categories. So energy, consumption, and carbon. Then people, what's the impact on your people, which is important. And then from a governance point of view, how locked in are you with a specific vendor? So, and this lock-in piece is becoming much more important to our customers when they're sort of coming to us. So, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So one is, we've got the VMware Broadcom acquisition, which is making customers think about VMware carefully. And then we've also got, so going into public cloud. So if you go into public cloud natively, it can be quite hard to get back out again. So you need to think carefully about what you put in. So, and they also charge you for coming out. So it's thinking about all of these issues. It's a pretty complex area. And the beauty about ESG is if you layer them on top of the financial metrics, it gives you a much fuller picture of what you need to think about. And that was going back to the original story. That's what the investor community wanted. They said, you need to look at a broader set of metrics in running your business rather than just financial numbers. So.
Okay, that's great. I mean, there's been some brilliant insights, and I really appreciate you sparing the time. So, Steen, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. Cheers.